All right, Rohit, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast again. Good to have you back for a second time.
Thanks for having me.
Of course,
glad to be here.
Just wanted to start a little bit on your background and your story, just maybe for people who didn't listen to the first interview we did, just give us a bit of a sense of an idea of who you are. If you could just go a little bit back in your story.
Yeah, depending on where you wanted to start, but I guess I went and did what my parents expected for a little while anyways. I went and did a double degree in engineering and economics, and after graduating moved to Sydney and was working at an engineering company for a little while. But I knew pretty quickly it wasn't really what I wanted to do longer term. And trying to tell your parents that you wanted to quit your engineering job to start a fashion tech company is always a fun conversation to have. But no, like my parents are super supportive and everything. And yeah, I guess over the last few years since that point, been very sort of closely ingrained into the startup ecosystem. So ran the fashion tech company for about 3 years called Stage Label. Interesting journey and lots of different lessons that we kind of obviously went into a bit of detail in the last episode that we did together. But I guess Cliff Notes, over the 3 years, helped launch and grow about 150 different brands globally over that time period. But we just kind of massively struggled to scale beyond that particular point. Happy to talk about that in a bit more detail again. Mm-hmm. After that, went and joined a not-for-profit organization called Startup Victoria to help develop and grow the startup ecosystem. So I was with them for a little while. Been running a podcast for the last 4 years now, which is a lot of what we'll be kind of speaking about, and which is how we first sort of connected as well. And I was running another business called Playbook Media, which is essentially a digital marketing agency helping launch and grow businesses, and been going through a bit of a transition over the last few months, taking on a new role and sort of having a job after a little while.
That's cool, man. Yeah, and maybe could you just explain, I guess, what made you so interested in startups? Why did you want to sort of get into this area initially? What was the appeal of startups for you?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Like, I think growing up, it wasn't really something that was discussed at home at all, or that I even knew as a career path. But sort of looking back, and this was only pointed out to me a few years ago, was that there were quite a few things that I did in high school and sort of uni that were considered entrepreneurial. I just didn't know that that's what it was. Like, I didn't know that there was a term for it, and I thought I was just doing things just for fun. Yeah. But I think that the big appeal for me was that, I think there was an opportunity for me to come in and create something from scratch and not have the limitations of being told that you could or couldn't do something. So I think that was really appealing. But also, a lot of my friends are very sort of successful doctors, lawyers, engineers, and they were all, extremely good at school and kind of finished top of the class and stuff. And I was always just more interested in other things. So I loved sport and, thought that was going to be my career for a really long time. But it wasn't until I kind of joined the startup ecosystem, and I still remember the very first event that I went to in Sydney. And it's kind of one of those things where you feel like you found your people. And for the first time, you're like, I thought that I was just so different and I didn't really fit in. But then you find that there are other people that kind of think very similarly to you and have the kind of same sort of approach. And when, you find that for the first time in your 20s, it's very intoxicating and you kind of want more of that. So like, I think for me, it was a lot of, it was just something that I almost knew instantly that I had found something that really resonated with who I was as a person. And I just wanted more of it.
Yeah, I so get that, because I had a similar experience where, kind of went through all school and even most of uni because of, like school, uni, and you kind of feel like you found like your tribe or the sort of people that you fit in with the most. And then when you actually start to think that there's something wrong with you, or that you just can't fit in with anyone, but then you actually end up finding people who you resonate with, and then you're on the same wavelength. And when you actually get that, you're like, oh wow, this is like, there was nothing actually wrong with me. It was just like, I then found my people. Yeah. And now I have, so now I've just got to keep going.
Yeah. And I think it's very hard like when you're in high school and you're a teenager to like identify that even like so I didn't think that there was necessarily anything wrong with me, or to a degree like I didn't even think that I didn't fit in. I think it was just more the things that my parents valued and that my friends valued were just not things that were all that important to me. And I always just felt that like I just didn't, it just wasn't on the same wavelength, but I didn't even know that there was another wavelength that other people kind of were at, or that I was necessarily that out of sync. I just thought it was a little bit different, or I was just, to be perfectly honest, like, you know, even my kind of parents have mentioned this to me a few times, is like, I just assumed that I was really lazy because I'm very sort of 0 or 100, and I was at 0 for the most part with a lot of things. Like I would just do the bare minimum to get okay grades, like enough to like not get in trouble, but just whatever the least amount of effort that was required. And for all of my other friends, it was the complete opposite. And I always just figured that I was just, you know, not motivated, not really passionate about anything except for sport, which it was the complete opposite. And I think like when you almost like identify that there is another part of you that reacts completely different when you're in another environment, and you find that that's kind of replicated somewhere else as well. Like I said, like I think it was just for me, I can't say it would be like that for everyone, but for me, it definitely became something that I was compelled towards, and it like I just didn't feel like I had another choice.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. So yeah, it's good. Like, and I'm really glad that you found your kind of niche, and I feel like I've sort of found mine. And I think that's like something to be super grateful for as well. That because some people I feel like probably never find like their sort of tribe or their niche. So the fact that we were both able to is really great, and I think it helps with everything, obviously.
Yeah, like you said, like very, very grateful. I feel also very lucky to have found it at such a young age. And like it's so hard because no one really knows anything, really. Not just like when you're young, but just generally. And you know, I can't remember if I mentioned this in the first interview that we did, but my friends had an intervention for me when I told them that I was leaving my job, and they all had extremely valid points around like, you know, what happens if this fails, you know, nothing about like business, you haven't done a business degree, you know, all of those sort of things. And they were all extremely valid points, and like objectively, they were all 100% right as well. But that advice was very binary in terms of the type of decision that you kind of make. And I think a lot of the time, the end result of like what that decision is doesn't really matter. It's what it kind of leads you on to from the start. So like I don't think that I assumed, I knew that there was likelihood of Stage Label failing. I wouldn't have, you know, obviously no one goes into it knowing it's definitely going to fail. But I think there's so much more that kind of comes from even trying something. And even if it doesn't work out, there are second or third degree sort of benefits or doors that open up that wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't made that first decision. And I think a lot of people get caught up in, you know, I can't take this risk because I will earn less money now. It's not about like, what does this look like in 5 to 10 years? What doors open up? What lessons do I pick up? And all of those sort of things. So yeah, I think for me, a lot of it was just like, I don't even know why, but I think a lot of it for me was just kind of conviction of knowing that this was the right thing for me at that time. And I think a large part of it was like, you know, again, I think for the most part, founders do understand the risk. They're not, I think there's this impression that people get around, you know, anyone that starts a business or starts a podcast or all these things like, oh, he's such a big risk taker and like, why would you kind of do these things? I think, you know, a lot of us understand that the likelihood of something succeeding is actually quite small, but you don't want to regret not knowing what would happen if you didn't try that. Yeah. And that was probably the biggest driver for me. It was like, you know, if it fails, I'll probably just come back and just get the same job that I was doing before or something similar. You know, maybe it might take me a year or two to kind of be that stage, and I'll be a year or two behind. But, you know, the upside is that I get to do something that I love and like learn new things and go and like back myself. And so where I think a lot of other people see a lot of risk, I thought that it was more risky not to do that.
Yeah, I love that. It's redefining that what risk is, because yeah, you could say it's risky and that you can lose everything or end up on the street, the most extreme case, or have to go back to that job or be behind. But the true risk is actually living a shitty life of unfulfillment and then wondering what could have been. That's the real trap.
And like, I think, again, I want to be, having had time to kind of think about things and really hopefully try to mature over the last few years, I don't think that necessarily, like, a fulfilling life needs to be something that involves business or kind of involves risk. Sometimes, like, a really fulfilling life for someone is actually just staying in that job and then them being able to do other things on the side that are kind of important to them. I think the biggest part of that is just generally self-awareness of, like, what are the things that will actually make you really happy and make you fulfilled.
Yeah.
And just do that. And if that is staying on the path that you are on, that other people expect to, that's amazing. That's fantastic. And if it's not, then you need to find a way to do that. And, I think the specific environment that I was sort of surrounded by with my friends, and just kind of having the dichotomy of, like, just feeling that way and knowing that I could feel that I had felt something and felt like a different person in different environments, just made me know that there was, I guess, more or kind of bigger things that I could do.
Yeah. Nah, I totally get that. And it's true. It's just about self-awareness of what is going to make you happy and fulfilled, and then just executing on that. So it makes total sense. And so I guess, one thing I want to talk a lot about, because you just crossed over the 4-year mark with your podcast. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm just keen to get a bit of a history on that. And why did you start a podcast? What was the motivation behind that?
I think, like with most things, there are multiple reasons. One was that so this is after a period where I had my own company. I was also, as I mentioned at Startup Victoria, like, I was in a position where a lot of founders would sort of come to me for advice or help. And we didn't have a CEO at that time, so I kind of made up my role a little bit, which is I will just meet with as many founders as possible and be as helpful as I could in terms of just general advice on kind of go-to-market or marketing or growth, which is a lot of my background, but also just helping join the dots for them between other co-founders, between potential investors and that sort of thing. But I also knew that, a lot of my advice was very contextual based on my own experience. And I had a very particular and limited experience in businesses. And there were all of these people from different industries and verticals and all of these things that I was just giving advice, but weren't necessarily things that I'd lived on my own. I have, like, weirdly looking back, like, I've always just been very fortunate to have maybe the naivety to, like, reach out to a bunch of people that I probably had no business reaching out to, and just a lot of people just saying yes to coffees, and were kind of quasi mentors for me with various businesses, or just would kind of put up with my really dumb questions. But I think there's a lot of those people that are out there that add a tremendous amount of value. Like, obviously a lot of the guests that you've had on the show kind of fall into that bucket. But I also know that for a lot of people, they might not have the ability to for whatever reason, sit in front of that person. They might not know what questions to ask. They might not know that person even exists. And so the value that I was getting from a lot of those conversations was one-on-one. And to a degree, part of it was like, I just got sick of answering the same question over and over again. But also, like, I was very aware that, like, I don't have all of the information, and there are other people that are much better placed to provide the kind of information and context that I could. And I also hate taking notes. So this was just a simple way of selfishly, like, let me just record the conversation, put it out there. And then whenever I'm speaking to a founder and they need help with global expansion or like pricing or like, specific stories around things, there's someone that I could point them to, which gave a very specific lens on their own experience. But I think, like, also a part of it, like, it wasn't just completely altruistic. Like, selfishly, I also wanted to build a network. It's been an incredible way to build just a network of people that I never would have imagined that I would have had access to. But also, growing up, I was extremely shy and introverted. And for whatever reason, like I just know that the only way that I'll do things or improve things is if I'm taken so far out of my comfort zone and I'm given no other choice but to improve and get better. And I was like, what better way to force myself to get better and more comfortable in this environment than literally recording my voice and putting that out there for other people to hear. So a lot of it was just, I'm just going to put myself out of my comfort zone and see what happens.
I love that. One thing you said was about building a network through the podcast, which I've definitely experienced that myself as well. I mean, that's how we connected in the first place initially, through the podcast. And it is crazy. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because there's something about a podcast which carries like weight and authority in a way. And I feel like, because like you said, like similar to you, I've reached out to people that I thought were just like on a way different level and wouldn't want to give me the time of day. But then surprisingly, they're like, yeah, let's do it. Like let's do an interview. And so it's like given access to so many interesting people and opened so many doors. And I don't know, it's strange, because to me, I feel like I've got this podcast, but when I started, it was just using Skype remotely, recording with Apple headphones. It was nothing fancy, but people still loved it. And so I'm just curious, like, on your thoughts, why do you think people respond so positively to a podcast and they're so willing to like come on and share their story and help? Have you ever put any thought into that?
I've put a lot of thought into it, mainly because I get a lot of questions about it, mainly around, first of all, how did you get that person? Secondly, why did they agree to come on your show? And I can't always speak to like why people agreed on particular things, but I think podcasts as a medium give an opportunity for people to provide a deeper, more nuanced and more contextual understanding of their own story or their own points. So especially for my show, and I think for your show as well, like a lot of entrepreneurs or founders, whenever they get their story out there, it is highlights reels of funding rounds and exits or growth, or kind of someone else picking which quotes to include into a news article, into the story that they're trying to put out there. And I think a podcast as a medium is just, especially something long form, like both of our shows are, is that you can literally just come here and talk about things in a bit more detail than you can through a blog post or through someone else writing about you in the press. And so I think people generally like that opportunity to come on and kind of share their story a bit more. It helps that, podcasts have become a lot more popular now than they were 4 years ago. And so a lot of the time when I was initially reaching out to people, like, what the hell is this? But it also had its advantages, which, at that stage, there weren't a huge amount of people that had podcasts as a platform to kind of put things out there. So, I think there's a give and take. And I think especially, your show's been running for quite a while and you've got a decent audience as well. Like, I think at a certain point that also switches, and you're not just asking them to take a bunch of time to come on and just talk. Hopefully there is a give and take with that, and you're helping, not just helping them tell their story, but you're giving them access to an audience and a community of people that are interested.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I put a bit of thought into it as well, and I think along similar lines. It's like it is a fair exchange of value in a way, because you are providing a platform for them. First of all, like, it's a good experience. Like, the times I've been interviewed, I love it. Like, it's like people show interest in your life, you share your story. It's like a fun experience. You get some like clips out of it, you can share all this kind of stuff. And then as well, it's like you get access to an audience. So there's benefits for both sides. Whereas if you just ask someone to grab a coffee it's like to you only, there's no real benefit to them. Like, sure, they get some satisfaction of helping someone and whatnot, but a podcast is a good excuse to have interesting conversations with cool people.
Yeah, and like, I think that value comes in different forms to different people as well. So, I know that like, people have explicitly said that they've wanted to come on the show too because they're in the middle of a fundraise and they want to kind of get their story out there, because from what I'm told, like quite a few investors VCs listen to this podcast. I've also been told that a lot of founders who, when they're going and speaking to investors, will listen to a previous episode that I did with them to better understand them and kind of their context as well. So like, I think it just becomes a data point or kind of research. There's so much content and so many different things out there. I think podcasts, again, not for everyone, but I think for a lot of people, it just becomes a much easier way to better understand someone than you can through a blog post.
Yeah, that's right. So you did the podcast. We went into a bit of detail in the previous interview we did, but you launched, you got number 3 ranking in iTunes, you got traction really early and started going well. So I guess, in those first few years that you ran that podcast, were there any, like, what happened? Like, what were the main sort of benefits you got out of it? Main sort of lessons for those first few years you did it?
Ooh, main benefits from the first few years. To be honest, like, I think we were talking about this a little bit before we turned on the microphone as well. The podcast recently tipped over 4 years, and I wrote a blog post looking back at some of the lessons, and I've spoken a little bit about some of the technical things that you kind of learn from podcasting or kind of doing all of those things. But like, I think for me, the podcast has also just been something that has become a central pillar for me in my life. So it's not just about the fact that I have a podcast. It's, I guess, almost in a sense of what that podcast represents for me. So I think in the first few years, like literally it was one of those things where, it's the one thing that, despite other things changing in my life, it was the one thing that kind of remained consistent. And I think there's a large part of just doing something consistently. I mentioned this in the blog post as well, but, I think whenever you're starting a new project, there's all of this kind of initial interest and hype, and, the podcast, for whatever reason, took off very quickly. But you invariably go through this lull of when you were then week after week editing a podcast at 2 a.m. that you go like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I still feel that way, but it's just kind of that ability to push through those kind of things and kind of remain consistent with it over the long term, which helps. But, obviously there's just a cascading effect of it as well. Like, I think, not just kind of cascading, like the value of content and podcasts specifically, compound over time. So it's not like one additional episode doesn't give you incremental value, but it's just more kind of doing it over time, even just from a download perspective. So someone who found me at the very start would have maybe 6 episodes that they could go back and listen to. Now there's 120 something. And for someone that finds me, it means that they've got a bunch of old episodes that they kind of that they can download, which means from just a download perspective, someone's coming along and giving me a bunch more downloads per listener than I was able to get a few years ago. So there's that kind of mechanism, but I think in terms of other things as well, like you just learn to, like I said, like you just learn to have more interesting, better conversations. Like at the start, I had a list of questions that I asked, and I was so worried and nervous, and I wouldn't necessarily kind of engage in the conversation at all. It was very much like these are the questions that I need to kind of get through. I need to get through them, and then I went through a phase of like, actually, I'm gonna go in there with almost no prep, and I'll go in there with 3 to 4 talking points, and I'll just wing it, which I did for a really long time, which I think has its pros and cons. Now, like I took a little bit of a break, come back, and I've gone deeper into kind of the research behind the kind of interviews as well. And like, it's just kind of different, and it evolves over time. So I think it's very hard to say, like, I learned these specific things. Like, I think it's just a mixture and a compounding of lessons and learnings that you kind of pick up along the way. Yeah, for sure. And I want to dive into definitely overall lessons that you've learned from the last 4 years. But I guess, because it's interesting, because you said that one of the things was the power of staying consistent and just week after week showing up. And it is hard because, especially at the start, like
for me, like the first few episodes I did got like 5 downloads or whatever. And then you're like, oh fuck, like what's the point in doing this, you know?
Yeah.
But then it's like you have to just keep going, and you eventually get to that point where it starts to snowball a bit. But
sorry, like on that point, like I'd be really curious to know how you treat the podcast now as well, because I think a lot of people get caught up in the download numbers.
Yeah.
And I was like that a little bit at the start, especially, you know, when the podcast took off very quickly. It was hard not to sort of look at that every day. But to a degree, like it's so kind of, it's a little bit out of your hands to a point. And also you can ride the high of it, but then it also can make you feel really shit when, you know, you have an episode that suddenly just doesn't do as well.
Yeah.
You're like, what did I do wrong? Like, you know, there's this kind of whole process that you can get to. I consciously try not to look at the download numbers as much anymore. Like I'll check it. I kind of have to check it in Libsyn when I kind of log in once a week.
That graph and you're like, fuck off.
Yeah. And like I do check the kind of monthly download numbers now, but and that's just kind of more for general trends. But like I think I try as much as possible to not focus on those type of metrics at all, because to a degree, like even if everyone just stopped listening to the podcast, I would never tell my guests, and I still want and value that conversation. So even if no one was listening, I still really kind of value that sort of time, and I would still kind of continue to put that out there. So, but I know how frustrating it can be, especially now when there are so many more podcasts out there. Like I got very lucky when I launched 4 years ago. Like there was not the same amount of competition that there is at the moment. There was maybe 1 or 2 other podcasts about startups in total in Australia at that time. And so it's a much different market. There's no way that my podcast would have taken off as quickly now if I'd launched now than compared to 4 years ago. And so like I think timing plays such a big factor in that. But you know, it's so easy to lose motivation based on you not kind of seeing progress and things like that at the start, where actually a large part of it is you just need to find a way to push through.
Yeah, so agree, man. And you asked like how I see my podcast, and that's exactly the same. I focus very little on the download numbers. Like literally I try to avoid it. Like, you said when you log into Libsyn, I like purposely try not to like look at that graph, because I'm just like, I don't care. Like, well, I care, but I just know it's the wrong thing to focus on. So like for me, the focus, I've always had this number of like 100 interviews as like this kind of goal.
I remember speaking to you about that.
Yeah.
I think it might have been the first time we met.
Yeah.
Coffee, yeah.
I think so, yeah. And so I've kind of had that in my mind, because I feel like, and this is the thing, like, sure, you can have a goal for like downloads or whatever, or you can monitor it. But at the end of the day, it's like I'd rather focus on what I can control, which is like how many interviews I can do. And I just know like you can't interview 100 interesting people and have great conversations with all those people and share that, and nothing good happens. Like to me, in my mind, I can't see any situation where I would not get some great benefit out of that, regardless of whether it's building an audience, connections, whatever. So to me, like download numbers is irrelevant. And I always say the same thing as you. It's like, even if literally no one listened to the podcast, I would still do everything I'm doing right now, because the other benefits you get from it, the connections, the relationships, like all those other things on the periphery, they're like the main benefit, you know?
Yeah. I think like 2 points that I'm going to add on top of that is, one thing that I am really a lot more conscious of now than I was before is focusing on inputs rather than outputs. So, like you were just kind of talking about, you know, controlling the things that you can control. I think it's very easy to, either in business or in podcasting or just anything that you do, it's so easy to get caught up in, you know, what, like I want to get to $1 million. I want to get to like this amount of kind of revenue, or like this many downloads or whatever. And like I said, like so much of that is out of your control, right? Like you could completely be off track, and then you could just close a big deal and just have that kind of sign overnight and kind of get you to that number. Or it could take you 6 years, 7 years, 8 years or whatever to do that. But I think the key is focusing on like, what are the input behaviors that you need to do that if you're doing them correctly, the output will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Is kind of the first part. But to your second part about like so many benefits, we were like talking a little bit about risk earlier. I think with everything that I try and do now, I try and put myself in a position where it's all about risk mitigation. And so even if it doesn't succeed in the way that other people expect it to succeed, so like even if the podcast failed and no one listened to it and never got to number 3 or all of those sort of things, like how do I go through that process and make sure that I still learn a new skill or kind of develop something that will help me with the next thing that I do? And so it doesn't, like, the outcome in itself doesn't matter, and doing the process of it will still benefit me regardless. We've kind of been joking a little bit about TikTok recently. Like I just started, I'm giving myself kind of 30 days to just post up daily content on TikTok, and I haven't really told anyone. Now I'm talking about it on the podcast. But the whole kind of idea is, I am not expecting my profile to kind of blow up or anything. I just want to understand the platform a little bit better. I want to, get more comfortable in speaking in front of camera, having a different form of creating content and being creative around those things in a way that like I don't normally get to do as much in terms of sitting behind a podcast. And if there's kind of other benefits that come out of it, great. At the moment, I only get sort of 70 to 100 views, but like I shared it on Instagram today about someone who added me on LinkedIn and said like, oh, like I found you of all places on TikTok. And I'm going to kind of like listen to your podcast and stuff as well. So first of all, you don't need to have a big audience. You don't need to quote unquote win on a particular platform or all those sort of things. Just like focus on things that will help you develop your skills, will just help you improve. And if you do them consistently and focus on the right input behaviors, the rest will take care of itself. But getting to the point where you like trust the process is really hard.
Yeah.
When you're not guaranteed an outcome.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that. That's so good. It's just focus on those inputs, the things you can control, let the outputs take care of themselves. And I guess like, have you always felt that way, or was there some mindset shift that you had that made you start thinking more about in that way, or did you just kind of always see the logic behind that?
So I can't say, like, I won't pretend like that was a very conscious decision, or like I articulated in a way of like, if I do these things, then like everything else will kind of magically fall into place, and I think that's where a lot of people, again, kind of going back to that risk thing, like a lot of people find it really difficult is it's hard to trust a process when there's no guaranteed outcome, right? When you're in a job, there is usually an approach of like, you stay here long enough, your salary will keep increasing, you'll become more senior. You don't know specifically when that will happen, but you know that that's a trajectory. But the hard thing about business or starting a podcast or starting any type of project is that you might start something and like, you don't know. Like you could do this for 25 years and it could go nowhere. It would be weird to do something for 25 years and like nothing happened, but that is also a possibility. But like, I think that has always been a way that I have always thought about things. Of like the same thing with the with quitting my job and starting Stage Label, was no guaranteed outcome that Stage Label will succeed, but I was like, I'll hopefully try and figure something out. Same thing with the podcast, was like within 3 weeks of having no audio engineering background, never edited anything, let alone putting together a podcast and launching it as well. I was like, worst case, I will just get less awkward when I speak to people. Yeah. And when you can remove all of the other stuff away from it, it doesn't matter what your growth rate is or what like your download metrics are or all of those sort of things. If you feel like you're still continuing to learn and develop, and that is the framework that you're kind of shaping success or the reason why you're doing something, like I said, like everything just kind of falls into shape. But I think that articulation of like focusing on the inputs versus outputs is the more coherent way of looking at that in a way that I wasn't able to describe when I was younger.
I love it, man. It's so good. And it's like, because if you think about it, if you approach everything you do in that frame of mind of, let's not worry about the outcome, let's just work out the outcome we want, but then focus on the inputs of what is going to maximize the chances of that output happening and just focus on them. And at the same time, make sure that even if it all fucks up and it fails, that there's been some other benefit that you've gotten from it. Like you said, like being able to speak better or whatever the case is. And if you do that if you try to do that for everything in your life, you literally can't lose. Like no matter what happens, it's not going to be like necessarily what you expect, but everything has an upside, and something will work exactly how you want it to eventually, or something will work in a way that you didn't expect that was even better.
Yeah.
And you just can't lose.
I think, again, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, like, oh, we were so lucky to find things that, we were really passionate about. But like a lot of the time, those things don't fall in your lap as well. So when I kind of talk about, I went to this event and then I found these people that like I resonated with, that's true. And like, I was very lucky that I found that. But the decision to go to an event in the first place is just, it's kind of one of those things that I think about of like, how do you increase the surface area of the possibility of luck hitting you?
Yeah.
Right? Is you like, it is very unlikely that you just sitting still and something magically falling into your lap, your dream job, a business idea, podcast, like all of those sort of things will just magically happen. You just have to put yourself in the right type of situations, have those right behaviors that mean that sooner or later you find like something just clicks. And not everything needs to click. Like I spoke about, a couple of businesses that I was running for a few years. There were all of these crazy ideas that I tried for a month or two that didn't go anywhere. I have like no recollection for most of them, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, and it is a bit of the, I don't know how to kind of say this, but like there is a bit of a lens of like looking back and saying like, this was successful and this is why that kind of worked. But, I think both of us were very lucky that we were able to find those things at a younger age. Maybe it was because we put ourselves in a situation where we tried a lot of different things at a younger age as well. Like, I don't know. Maybe we just got very lucky that like one of the first few things that we tried just kind of resonated or clicked. But, I think part of it is like, you just need to do the things, like do the inputs that give you an opportunity to find things that you're more passionate about or like help you find that path.
Couldn't agree more, man. And it's just, I believe it. It's a combination of preparation and luck, That's the thing, like, especially my life now, the past year, I feel like I've set my life up so nicely, like from how I want it right now. And that's been, like, it's been deliberate, but I don't deny the role of luck in that as well. There's been luck too, but it's a combination of both, It's like if you just try things, if you be deliberate and try lots of things and are willing to fuck up, and then eventually luck is going to be on your side and things are going to come together and work. And so, yeah, I believe it's just a combination of the two things.
And you know what? Sometimes saying no to something that you've been doing for a really long time is like actually what you need to pull yourself out, right? Yeah. Like similar to you, like the last 12 to 18 months has just been a really interesting journey of, not running my own business anymore and kind of taking a break from the podcast and coming out of a relationship and like all of those sort of things. But, I think it is also very easy to get stuck on that same treadmill of like, I'm just doing these things and I'll just continue to do them. But that luck kind of works the other way of like, actually, this isn't the right thing for me right now. And recognizing that, but not just recognizing it, but taking action to then change that situation is again, something that's not easy, but if you do it, you again sort of are having the right input behaviors to hopefully have the right output.
Yeah, totally, man. So let's talk about the last 12 months because, one of the things you said before was like the power of consistency, especially around content, which I agree with and see. But then, you kind of had this gap, I guess, for the past 12 months. You've just recently started it up, going hard with the podcast again. It's been great to hear. But you kind of took a bit of a break. So what was going on there? What made you want to take that?
Yeah, a bit of a loaded question. Look, like I don't know I don't pretend to know what's going on in anyone else's life, but I know for me that it's very rare that I'm excelling in one area and failing in others. It's usually everything's going really well or everything's not going that great. And, you know, I think for me, I was just getting to a stage where essentially after 8 years of kind of running my own businesses, for the most part, I was just on empty, like emotionally just drained. And I think business especially is it's an incredible way, an opportunity to learn. The way that I kind of phrase this is that, you know, you are dropped into a jungle with a machete and you can choose whatever direction you want to go in, right? Like you've got nothing kind of holding you back. The problem is that you don't know if you're heading in the right direction. And that is how I felt of like running my businesses, was that I had an opportunity to go really far and learn all of these skills and have all of these experiences and lessons that I wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. But I also know that for what I needed at that kind of particular time, I also just wanted to take a step back and learn from other people. And there are like massive gaps in my own learning of, you know, what does it take to, I'm really good at starting businesses. I'm really good at kind of going from 0 to 10. I have no idea what it takes to go from 10 to 100 and beyond. And so part of me just taking a step back was like, I wanted to learn from other people. You know, how do other people lead? How do they structure teams? How do they kind of set a vision and all of those sort of things? I've got my own processes, but I've never learned that. Like I've had to kind of always make it up on the spot. And so like that was really exciting. And also obviously the role that I have now is just kind of understanding, you know, what does it take to kind of still be in the space that I'm involved in and still be doing a lot of what I was doing before, which is helping founders, you know, finding ways of being able to help them grow their companies, but also being inside a much larger organization, understanding like how does a company of that size continue to scale at the rate that it does? Like what are the systems and processes? What does that look like? How do you shape teams? How do you make decisions? How do you do kind of all of those sort of things? So that for me was like, you know, one thing. With the podcast, I was just getting to a stage where it became a habit in the worst way possible, in that I stopped doing it for the reasons that I was doing it, and it more became an exercise of like who am I getting? Like, I have to publish an episode this week. What is the least, like the lowest barrier to me just kind of putting this out there? And like I would say like my the input behavior was that, like, I keep going back to this, like the behavior was the same in terms of like I was putting out a podcast, but the intent behind that wasn't right. And I was doing it because I felt like there was an expectation from me from other people that you've been doing this same thing week on week for so long, like how can you stop?
Yes.
You can't stop. Like, and if you've spent all of this time building this up, why would you then suddenly kill it? You know, like that's it's really, really difficult. But like, I think I also knew for my own sanity that like I had to kind of break those habits and break that expectation. And it's not so much like, I don't think that, I mean, I got a few messages from people saying like, what's happening with the podcast? Are you coming back? And kind of all of those sort of things. But
sorry, did you think that, because I guess in your mind, did you feel like if you stopped doing it, even if it was just like temporarily, that would just undo everything that you've built?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. 100%. And that was like the weird thing about coming back, was that I was like, is anyone going to listen to this now? You know, it had been, I think, 9 months in total. Whenever someone asked me, I was like, it's probably been like 3 or 4 months since I published. But then actually looking back at the dates, it was 9 months until like between episodes. And yeah, I like there was a big part of me of just like, will anyone care that it's back? Will anyone kind of listen to the show? Like, what will, like, after it being this very conscious thing of like me getting this kind of process and like understanding what kind of questions are to ask and just being in this flow, will I be the same? Like, will it be like starting from day one of the podcast again and all those sort of things? So like, it's weird having done something for so long and taking a break and then wondering whether, you've just thrown the last 3 years away.
Yeah, I get that. And so I guess so. It's fair to say you just kind of, you felt like you were going through the motions. You maybe were experiencing a bit of burnout. You kind of, your intention behind doing the podcast was just, you didn't feel like it was the right intention. And I guess was the only way you saw that you could maybe reconcile that was just to consciously take some time out of it. Is that kind of, was that your mindset?
So I think, like, to be honest, I think it was just like a very big moment in time for me in general of like me kind of jumping out of Playbook Media, stopping the podcast, kind of going through a breakup, or kind of in the process of going through a breakup of like a long-term relationship as well. And it just seemed like the right thing for me to just pause everything and take the time to kind of reset and re-energize and also reprioritize.
Yes.
I always kind of felt that I would bring the podcast back at some stage. A large part of it being like, I've done this for so long, it would be weird to kind of throw it away.
Yep.
I didn't know what that kind of timeline would look like, and it was a little bit indefinite. But I think part of it was just like trying to remove this like identity that other people kind of have for you, or that you create for yourself. Like I had this with Stage Label as well, was that, you know, when like jumping out of Stage Label, everyone still kind of associated you with that. And my identity was so closely tied to me having this business and being associated with that, that it can't just be like you, there is a lot more to you than like having a podcast or having a particular business. It just becomes such a big part of your life that it just becomes central to everything. And I think it's also really important to have that point whenever and people get to that different point at different stages, but being able to separate out the two. And I think part of me taking a break was like, I just needed to, like, as weird as it sounds, like find myself again of, you know, who am I without this podcast, without all of these other things that other people expect me to have. Like, who am I as a person? Yeah.
Oh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
So I guess what did you learn during those 9 months in that break?
What did I learn in those 9 months?
I guess in direct relation to the podcast, and how did that kind of change the way you looked at it?
Yeah. So I would say, like, when I brought the podcast back, I think I wanted to bring it back as something a little bit different. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Like, I think the podcast has become a central pillar in my life for a lot of different reasons. But it's kind of flipping it the other way around, which is, you know, there was this almost this like expectation of me to do this podcast every week, and it became a chore rather than something that I'm like, this is something that energizes me and is a reflection of who I am and the type of person that I want to be, in a sense, which sounds really vague. But like what I kind of mean by this is the type of guests and the quality of guests that I've had on the show and the type of research that I put into the episodes now is so different to what it was like at the tail end of the interview. And I think it's just me going back to enjoying the process, me doing, like, having alignment of doing it, but why I'm doing it as well. But then also just kind of understanding that there are particular things that make me enjoy that particular podcast a bit more, or enjoy that process a lot more. And part of it is, you know, even something small like reaching out to guests that I never thought that I could get on the show. That was one of the things that I loved about the podcast early on. But then, you know, you kind of set up a different baseline for things as well. So that baseline changes. So, like, you know, I'm sure when you were getting 5 downloads per episode, getting to 100 would have seemed monumental. And then when you get to 100, it's like, cool, like, when do I get to 1,000? And then, you know, it kind of, your baseline always changes over time. And I think what the podcast has always been to me was like a representation of me going, like, how do I extend myself beyond my limits of things? Or like, how do I do things that are a little bit like push me or stretch me or like make me feel uncomfortable? And for a large part of time, that was like just me being on the podcast and putting my voice out there. But I think a lot of it has also become reaching out to people that I never thought that I would get on the show. Like people that I, like one thing that I've loved about bringing the show back is whenever people send me messages like, I cannot believe that you got that person on the show. And it's such a great feeling, not just because they've said yes and all of those sort of things, but I think it's even just the process of like the fact that you tried to get them on, right? Like whether people say yes or no almost doesn't matter.
Yes.
But I'm trying to make it a habit of like, how do I do things that really just stretch me and do things that would like surprise me and make me really happy if they kind of came along. And again, like whether it happens or not doesn't matter, but it's that same, I feel like it's going to become a recurring theme for the show. Like it's that input behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good, man. And yeah, you've had some fantastic guests on the podcast since you brought it back. And yeah, it's cool, man. Like, cause I just see that you have like a renewed vigor about you, like, and the podcast. It was actually funny. I remember we caught up one time when you were kind of on the tail end before taking that break, and you had just come from doing a podcast interview, and you were like pulling your suitcase and you're kind of like trudging along and you kind of look almost like depressed.
Yeah. I mean, I probably was, to be honest. Yeah, it's funny how like little things can make such a big difference in that. And like I said, I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, a large part of that is like, it's not just one thing in my life, it's everything. And I think like when you make particular decisions in terms of like what you do and don't want and what you can and can't accept, and again, like you force yourself to kind of, if you've been off the right path and kind of, even though it's difficult, like kind of reassessing and realigning and kind of moving towards the right path, it's just a really good feeling, and like everything else kind of falls in place.
Yeah, man, totally. And there was one thing as well you've said to me previously, which I thought was really good advice, and I was wondering if you could share it here, is looking at time horizons as well, because I had like a similar situation like the past few months, because like I've started doing a lot more like in-person interviews, and it's been harder just because of like various like corona things and restrictions and whatnot. And so like I haven't been as motivated to go with the podcast. And then I was talking to you about that in terms of like yeah, I'm kind of losing that motivation, like what should I do kind of thing. And you gave me some good advice looking at time horizons. Maybe you could just share that here, because I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what I said, so so
do you want me to remind you?
Well, I think I kind of know.
You basically told me that, look, because I was looking at things at a very short time horizon, so it's like the next few months. What am I going to do or whatever? But then you were thinking more like, okay, what do you need to do now to ensure that in 10 years time you're still enthusiastic about this and you want to keep doing this project?
Yep.
And I thought that was just a good way to look at it, because we can get caught in like the minutia of like today and tomorrow and next month, but it's like, especially with like a podcast, it is like a 10-year journey, 10-year plus, so it's like how sure, I could burn myself out and do like 50 interviews in the next few months or whatever, and that will get me to my like 100 goal or whatever, but what do I need to do to just actually make that sustainable for the next 10 years so I still have enthusiasm about it?
Yeah, sounds like great advice. Yeah, but like, you mentioned earlier that you have this goal to get to 100, and like, I think it's really, I remember when I first got started, I'm like, if I get to 30 episodes, like 30 episodes seems huge. It seems like such a big number, but I think when I think about my goal for the podcast is that it moved away from like, I need to launch this specific type of episode, or I need to do it as like a weekly thing. Like that is my expectation, that is my cadence. And actually, for me, it's more, like you were mentioning, my goal is to do this as a 10-year podcast. And I don't know whether I can do a weekly show every week for 10 years. Maybe, I'm not sure. But I think reframing that from a context of like, instead of focusing on particular type of episodes or a frequency that is difficult to maintain or sustain, having a different level of kind of expectation that you put on yourself of like, what are the things that I need to do? If my actual goal is like, I don't care how many downloads I get this month or this week or this particular episode, I just want to make sure that I can maintain and continue doing this for 10 years. Just changes the way that you look at the way that you make decisions in the short term. So I think like the context of how we were talking about that was, I think you were still, I was asking you whether you were planning to bring the podcast back because you were taking a little bit of a break as well. And we were kind of going through that process. And I said, there is no point rushing it back before you're ready, because if you do it too early, you're going to burn out and you haven't taken the time to like re-energize and kind of all of those sort of things. And like, again, the way that I sort of look at this is, because I want to do this for 10 years, taking a 9-month break in the grand context of 10 years is not that, it's a substantial amount, but it doesn't really matter. Yep. But when you're in the moment of like, when you're on month 4 and you're like, I'm getting these emails from people going, hey, like what the hell is happening? Are you bringing the podcast back? It's so easy to go, oh, fuck, like I've got all of these people that are lined up that I've said, if I bring the podcast back, I'll bring them on the show, or, all of those sort of things. Yeah. It's very easy to get caught up in that. But I guess taking the power away from all of those kind of day-to-day or like those micro things that happen in the short term and focusing on kind of the long-term perspective on that, it just kind of like just helps you align on the right things. Like, are you ready? Can you go for the next sprint towards things? And removing some of the expectation around that just makes things a lot easier as well, right? Then you can do it based on like, do I have the energy and the purpose to kind of do this? Or if I'm doing something for 10 years, that there is no way that someone can keep a weekly show going for 10 years. Joe Rogan can. But, if you don't have kind of the resources or the people around you or all of those sort of things, like you need to take a break. And so if you know that you need to that you will need to take a break at some point, getting to a point where you've burnt out and you recognize that and you can take a break, it's just much easier to do than going, I've been doing this for 3 years. Like I can't stop. I can't take this break because, Yeah,
I totally agree, man. And it's good. And it's been good for me to see as well, like in your situation following that, because it really, like, sure, people would have noticed that you stopped for 9 months, but now like observing you coming back and starting again and doing it, I can see that you've come back like better and stronger, and like and it's been a good thing for the show, like it's nothing really bad has come from it. It's all, there's been a lot of good stuff that's come from it. And so I guess just seeing that has been good for me, and it just shows everyone, like people listening or watching this, it's like, yeah, you don't be afraid to, I guess, take that time if you feel like you need it. And there's probably, everything isn't just going to go in the trash just because you stopped doing it for a few months.
Mate, like, I mean, one of my biggest regrets about business is like not realizing this a lot sooner. I found it so hard to go on holidays and take some time off, because I'm like, how can I take some time when like we're just not at a point where I'm like happy and comfortable? Like, how can I take this time off while the team is continuing to work on things? Like I felt very uncomfortable and just not good about that situation, to a point where like my partner at the time, we would go on holidays and we're in South America, and like we're in this hostel like by a mountainside, and it's like one place with internet, and I'm there doing a pitch for a potential client. Like I had no ability to kind of like switch off and take some time off. And looking back, I think that was really detrimental for the business, for my own sanity, and for my partner and like the people around me, just because I wasn't able to recognize that actually the long-term benefit of me pausing and recharging is better for everyone, versus just going, short-term, like I can't miss out on this email, or like what happens if I miss out on 3 days and I miss an important phone call, or all of those sort of things. Like it's just such a, looking back, it makes a lot of sense, but when in that moment, it's just so difficult to kind of recognize that, unless if you're kind of almost kind to yourself and sort of understand and think about that.
Yeah, I get it, man. It's sort of like, it's like breaking those patterns of, you kind of have these beliefs of like things should be like this, or I need to be doing this, and then actually being willing to break them, or not even necessarily break them, but just actually reassess, like, is this serving me? Like, is this the best thing I could be doing for myself right now? So yeah, I guess, have there been any other like patterns you've sort of like reassessed in yourself, or like any other changes you've on reflection, like made in the past year or so?
There's a lot. There's a lot. And I think like part of it is, you know, kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, like just went through a lot of different changes in my life over the last 12 months or so. So, you know, obviously got out of a long-term relationship.
That's always a cause to reflect.
It's always a cause to reflect, you know, and I think especially at a time when like nothing, like there wasn't a specific catalyst around it. It was just more things just weren't sort of right. So like, you know, I think breaking out of a pattern where like, I guess you and the person that you're with are both kind of unhappy, but you don't really recognize it as much when you're kind of in that kind of particular moment. But then again, just kind of recognizing that and kind of taking action, even though it hurts a lot in the short term, like even in the kind of medium term, like I think both of us are much better off as a result. You know, going away from running my own business to having a job has been a bit of an interesting transition as well. But it's also just kind of opened up a range of different things for me. There's a bunch of other patterns, like we kind of spoke about this a little bit, of the last few years. I have always like money hasn't ever really been a big driver for me. And in fact, like I've probably made decisions that have lost me a lot of money in the short term, or you know, kind of things that have consciously meant that I made less money. But even with businesses, a lot of it was just reinvesting everything that I had. So I'm like, what's the minimum that I need? For the most part, I don't think even my team knew this, but I paid myself significantly less than everyone else in the team, just because I wanted to use that money to hire for growth. And I'm like, I've got upside in kind of the equity, and you know, if this works, then you know, there's alignment in terms of, again, what I kind of want. But it also just means that you get used to that particular way of thinking about money. And it's only been kind of recently and through a couple of really close friends that I've got at the moment who we have kind of regular catch-ups with, and we're both at all three of us are at very sort of similar stages in life. And then following on from that, like I found out that like we had kind of similar sort of experiences as well, and like kind of having separate conversations. But I think there were a few conversations there that like made me really kind of break a lot of patterns in thinking for myself. So like I think it's very easy to get caught up in the gray of like, you know, I don't know if I want to make this particular decision. Like I don't know if it's the right time, or like kind of COVID happens, do I just wait, or kind of all of these sort of things. But actually you only need to optimize for one thing, which is what will make you happy right now. And even if it's like a particular thing for a shorter time period, that kind of works. So like,
can you give like a semi-specific example, like around like, so money, for example, you've like always just wanted to like reinvest back in the business. You've like consciously like paid yourself less than you're worth just because you want to reinvest that, and you find it very hard to spend money. Like, are you doing something differently now, or like is there a specific thing? Or
so okay, like I can be specific in terms of like particular things as well. So like I have always felt that because I'm going to run a business and because of things like COVID can happen, I needed a safety net to fall back on. And it's like a bunch of family things as well. Like I've always kind of felt like I've needed to have money there in case of like my mum specifically, or just kind of family in general needs it. And so I've always been very conscious of like, I've never needed that much to live or kind of be comfortable. So like I'll do things that are the bare minimum of whatever. But I also know that that's not necessarily a great pattern, because you think about money in a very negative way. And it was through these conversations of like talking to my friends of just, you know, I have a very comfortable pay packet at the moment with my current role, but I was still feeling very uncomfortable in spending more money than I was before. And part of it was like, you know, I don't want to get into the cycle of like golden handcuffs and just feeling like I kind of get onto this kind of trap. I also don't know if they're going to work out, or likely that I'm going to be like, I hate this and I'm just going to quit and get suckered into this kind of particular lifestyle. But, I think part of it was just going, it's okay to also be comfortable. And by comfortable, I mean just having nicer things.
Yeah.
You don't need to. I have always felt like, unless if I was really struggling with business, with work, and like almost kind of being on the edge or on the fringe of things, that I wasn't making the most of my potential. And I think like part of getting to the burnout and part of getting to all of those sort of things is like, I was just redlining for 8 years and that's not good. Sometimes again, like you need to take that step back and you need to like recharge and refresh, and you can always go back there. Like I think knowing that you can do that helps, because you know that you are capable of doing it, and so it makes it a bit easier to get back. But it doesn't mean that you need to be in that way for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like specific examples, like moved out of an old place that I had been sharing with my partner for 5 years, which was really nice and convenient. We had an epic deal where like the landlord didn't increase rent for 5 years, but like I needed a change, and just moved into like a much nicer place. Started doing some angel investing into companies as well, which is always stuff that I've wanted to do, but I've more kind of acted as a bridge between sort of startups and investors, and it's nice to kind of get involved in that. Just do it. So I've like the way that I've kind of framed this for myself, and the way that I've made it more comfortable for me to break those patterns is, for 12 months, I will just do things that I wouldn't normally do. It doesn't need to be something that kind of lasts beyond that time period, but I'm giving myself 12 months to do really essentially things that I would think would have thought were extremely irresponsible with money, but things that will help me just break the pattern.
Yeah.
And knowing that there is potentially a timeline on that, or knowing that I've got 12 months to do that, just makes me feel a lot more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So it's like for 12 months, I'll get kind of a crazy place, and I'll get a nice car, and I'll like redecorate, like, just spend a bunch of money on things that I never would have spent money on before. But it's just breaking a pattern, and knowing that you're just doing it for 12 months is just like, it's like a phase in my life.
Yeah.
And maybe I will feel differently in 12 months and like want to continue. I don't know. But I think it's like giving yourself permission to do those sort of things, and also doing it in a way that makes you feel more comfortable, but then also doing it properly versus half-assing it.
Yeah, I love that, man. So good. And yeah, thanks for sharing that, because it's I think it's just so useful as a framework to understand and for people to hear, because yeah, it's like you've lived your life in this one mindset your whole life, and then it's such an ingrained pattern, and it's definitely like it's served you. It's helped you build everything you've built now, but then there's also drawbacks to that. And so it's almost like you're consciously just exploring the polar opposite of that mindset for a fixed period of time. And then, like, again, maybe you go back to the other extreme, or maybe there's like a center point that you find which brings you more like happiness and fulfillment. And it's just like, that's the thing, man. It's like, I really believe it. We just need to explore like and see different things, and especially things that we wouldn't normally do, like last year, for example, I flew first class because I just wanted to experience it. It's like, sure, I could have gone an economy and it's like cheaper or whatever, but it's like, well, like, let's just do this. Like, I want to see what it's like,
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not doing it every month or every year, but maybe I am. And I just want to experience that and see it. And then you can make decisions moving forward. And so I love it, man. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
And it's like, to be honest, it was really, really difficult for me to do that to a particular point. I initially found that whole thing very, like, when you're used to, it's like, I mean, I should also counteract it. Like, it wasn't like I was kind of living on the street and like kind of struggling to put $2 together. But like, I think when you are used to like a particular kind of way of approaching things, it's very hard to kind of break that particular pattern. And I have just been very conscious of I think the big thing for me is just giving myself the freedom to just do whatever I want over these 12 months. And so I went through this phase of where I was kind of talking a little bit about the gray. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to buy a house. I don't know if I like potentially want to move overseas. I don't know, like COVID's happening. Do I just kind of stay here and like wait, or like, I don't really know what's happening. And my friends is just like, first of all, why do you want to buy a house? You're just going from one commitment that you had to like another 30-year commitment towards something at a time when like you're going through all of these sort of changes. Like, just rent something for 12 months and if you kind of change your mind or like you still want to move or whatever, you can totally do it. And so like I think part of it is just again, like my approach may not necessarily kind of work for everyone else, but I think it's more knowing that it's for 12 months, knowing that what I really want right now is a permission to just try different things and just experience different things right now. Whether that's a house, whether that's a type of car that I wouldn't normally get, whether that's just whatever. Just having this year to kind of experience things and do things that, again, push me a little bit out of my comfort zone and force me to think a little bit differently. And, at the end of the day, it's kind of like money's money. And I always felt like I had to hold it in case of a rainy day. But it's also sort of understanding that it's important to kind of have savings. So I've only started angel investing after I got to like my kind of target sort of savings goals. So I know that I'm taken care of for like a year or two if I need to. But it's also just like knowing that if anything, like these are all just mental frameworks that you've put in your own mind in terms of like how you look at things. And there are different ways of living, kind of different ways of kind of exploring things, and you don't just need to like live a particular way.
Oh man, so good. And it's so true because that's right. Everything, so believer, man. It's just like every opinion is in its own way valid. People are so like convinced with their own convictions. They think that their own opinions or their own way of doing things are correct, and they'll like stick to them and like die by them. And you can't say that anyone's like wrong. Like everyone's just right in their own way. And the more that you're willing to like explore other ways of living or like other ways of thinking, other frameworks, that just like expands your mind. And then you can actually make a more educated decision about what works for you once you've seen different ways of living. So I fucking love it, man. It's
good. I mean, like, I think a big part of it for me was like, you're right. Like, I think seeing that from other people was a really big thing for me. So like the two friends that I was talking about, like we have this fortnightly dinner that we were organizing, we had organized. And just being able to have that group of people that you can be kind of completely open and honest with and like talk about things. We've all gone through, we have a very similar sort of background or very similar stages in life as well. And getting to a stage where you can talk to them and just be really open and honest, but then also hear how they're kind of approaching things, or them identifying things in you that maybe you didn't sort of pick up on either is extremely, part of self-awareness is like not just you knowing all of the answers and just being so open and kind of crystal clear in terms of like how you do things. I think a lot of that again is just putting yourself in situations where you surround yourself with the people that can bring that out in you, and also just be open and honest with you as well, in terms of particular things. So it's just crazy how much things have changed in such a short time period. Yeah,
it's nuts. How's being a bachelor? How do you find that?
Mate, it is. We've had a few conversations around this. So we have a weekly call set up as well, which I love. Like they're part of my favorite parts of the week. But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
It's different for you, yeah? Like that's another pattern that you've broken in a way.
It is very different. It is very different. So like, I mean, for the most part, so like my last relationship was 6 years. And then directly before that, I was in a 4-year relationship as well. So really for 10 years, almost back to back, I've kind of been in relationships, and I've always had someone around. And to a degree, like part of that whole thing, thanks for calling it out, is is, you know, like I think I've always had those type of relationships as crutches of like, I can create all of this chaos and like do all of this other stuff with some form of stability on the other side. But yeah, I think like part of this other habit or kind of thing that I'm trying to break is just getting more comfortable and just being more deliberate with the type of people, with what I want, and also the type of people that I kind of want to spend more time with.
Yeah, that's right, man. And I believe it because, like, I think we've all had the experience, and like I'll say for myself, like, it's with anything, man, like relationships, careers, whatever. A lot of the time we just stumble around and just fall into like whatever is there. And like this has been the case for me, where, you know, you just kind of, especially with romantic relationships, is like how deliberate have you actually been in like defining what you want? And like you can't like define exactly what you want because no one's like, you shouldn't just have like a laundry list of like things. But I think it's important to actually, and it's not even about like the other person. It's more about like, this is talking of my personal experience, is just actually creating space for yourself to find out like who you are and what you want and what you need, and also just completing yourself, you know, like not, because that's what so many people get wrong, man. They like get into a relationship and it's from a place of lack, of like needing someone else to complete them because they don't feel complete by themselves. And like that's definitely been the case for me in the past, but like for me now, I feel like I'm in a place where it's just like I don't need anything or anyone. I'm like completely content by myself, and that's like what you need to do, because it's like stages. Like you got to have the relationship with yourself set, and then you can add another person. And I think so many people just skip that first step of like sorting their own internal shit out. And you see it all the time, man. It's like you can't have a healthy relationship with someone if you haven't sorted out your own internal state. And so I think like deliberately creating that space and going through that experience of really discovering who you are and the things you need to work on and fixing them and addressing them is so important, and something I've been doing. And I don't know, do you feel like it's something you've been doing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% agree with that. Like, I think you put it, I think I've mentioned this to you, was something that when we first kind of spoke about this sort of stuff a little while ago, was, you know, a lot of the time, I think the way that you put it is a lot of the time, you know, we come with all of this baggage and we never really, I don't know if you said it specifically like this, but like we never really kind of take the time to unpack it and get rid of all of that stuff. But what tends to happen is we just kind of pick up those bags, pick up some more, and then go dump it on the next person. And that just becomes a vicious cycle. And it's so true. Like, I think it's, you know, as much as I think a lot of people would like to say that, you know, oh, if you kind of identify these things, like, why can't you just work on them while you're in the relationship and things like that too? You know, it's a lot of the time it's that environment is just not bringing the right thing out in you. No. I think, like I said this to my former partner, you know, was that we could have just spent the rest of our lives together and it could have just been okay.
Yeah.
And like, that's not what I want. Yeah. Like, as terrible as it sounds, like having an okay life is okay. Like, it's for the majority of people, like that's a pretty good life, but it's knowing that, especially when you know that you can do something to change that is very difficult to kind of live with. And that was not the type of life that I wanted for me. And it's also not the type of life that I wanted for her either. Like, right. You know, I think that she, you know, I've got a lot of respect for her, and I think she deserves the best as well. But for whatever reason, like, we just weren't bringing the best out in each other. And, you know, I needed the space and time to kind of go and work away on my own things, and it was just impossible for me to do with both of us together. So, yeah.
That's right, man. I always say it's like building a house, and the foundation needs to be strong, because otherwise you can build the greatest house or the greatest relationship with someone, but if it's built on sludge, it's going to collapse eventually. You
Yeah.
know?
And I think it's really tough when, like, I guess if like someone cheats or like something happens, like there's a catalyst for things, like it's much easier to kind of draw the line.
Yeah.
It's much harder when it's not that, right?
Yeah.
Like when there's just a drifting apart and it's gradual. It's much more difficult, I think, to like make a decision and a call, especially when you've been together for a while. It doesn't, however, mean that it's not also the right thing for you to do.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, it's I don't know. It's such a tough one. Like I would just say from my experience of like having gone through that process and seeing what a difference it has made in kind of my own life and how much happier I am, and also just how much happier she is as well. Like it's shit in the short term, but you know, sometimes you're just much better off in those type of situations. Even if you're both nice people and you're good together, you just really have to kind of gauge, is that the type of life that you want?
Yeah, that's right, dude. Again, it's just like looking at that long term. It's almost like just it's like risk assessment again, of just like assessing like, but the risk is just, what is my life going to look like in 80 years time if I continue to play this out? And like you said, sometimes it's okay, and which is fine for some people, but you know, I know you and I are similar. Like we don't just want to be okay. We want to like thrive and have the best life possible, which does sometimes mean making harder decisions in the short term.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, also, like, I mean, like life is really long for most of us, right? Like we'll live to 80.
Yes.
You know, if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, like you have another 50 years to go. If you're feeling that way now, the next 50 years are going to be an uphill battle. And knowing that you're like less than halfway through and you're already feeling like shit, and it will continue to be like that for the rest of the 60% of your life, like that just seems like such a horrendous way to approach the rest of your life. So, you know, again, like, just want to contextualize all of this as like, this is just like the way that I kind of approach things or whatever, and it's not right for everyone, but it's definitely like, I'm just very conscious of, you know, I don't just want to settle for something that's okay or something that's good.
Yeah.
You know, I'm who knows, like I may never find something better or kind of all of those sort of things. But like, I think it's, again, keep going back to that kind of whole thing. You know, if you do the right things and kind of put yourself in the right type of opportunities, then you give yourself a better chance of having the right outcome.
That's right, man. Input and output.
Input and output. Yeah. I'll be very disappointed if that's not the title for this episode.
It's a good one, man. Yeah. And I love that, man. It's such a good framework to have. And I've always said it myself as well. Like I'm happy to be by myself for the next 10 years, if that's what it takes. Cause like, and it's not even like about romantic relationship necessarily, but it's like, I'm willing to, as long as I can see the long-term prospects of the seeds I'm planting now come into fruition at some point in the future, like whether it's 2 years from now, 5 years, 10 years, I'm happy to wait. Because like you said, people say life is short, but reality is, like, for most people, like you said, life is long. It's long enough. And like for me, I'm willing to pay a short-term price just to maximize that long-term, you know?
Do you know when life seems short? Life seems really short when you're not conscious of the decisions that you're making. And so if you just kind of let things slide, you're like, oh, it's been 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however length of time has just flown by, and I haven't really like what's happened. And I think that it's very easy to kind of get stuck in that process of, again, like just going back to like my partner and I, we could have just been together for another 6 years, and that could have just kind of flown by. But I think for me, it's kind of one of those things of like, I have no regret of having spent 6 years in that relationship and just getting to a stage where like, actually it wasn't right for us. But getting to a point where I then knew that it wasn't the right thing, spending another day, another year, or another 6 years, that is something that I would start regretting. And so like, I think, yeah, like I don't think that you need to necessarily regret the entire process,
Yes.
but I think when you get to a stage when you know that it's not the right thing and then you keep doing that, that's when I think you get to a stage of like, actually you're just doing more harm to yourself than anything else.
Yeah, that's right, man. And if you can have that mindset, which like a lot of people find that hard to have, but it's like, yeah, even if something's not like perceived good, like as in it didn't work out in the long term, which you could say is like a bad thing, but you actually see the process as necessary and you're like grateful for the whole process of getting to that point. Because that reality is that's just what you needed. You like, sure, you came to that realization after 6 years that that's maybe not the right path for you, but you actually needed that whole 6 years just to get to that single point of decision. And it couldn't have happened any other way, you know, like you needed that time. So it's just see it for what it is and be grateful that you took the lesson and executed on it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Like zero regrets about those sort of things. And like, I think that's where people get really tied up of, you know, even with the stage level experience, a lot of it for other people is like, you know, there was all this hype and like things seemed that they were sort of really working out and they didn't, you know, what do you sort of regret? Like, if you knew how it would turn out, would you not have started the business in the first place? And when you've just spent like 3 years of your life pouring your life savings into something, and things are going to plan, I think it's very easy to go, yeah, actually, like I wish that had never happened and I wish that I'd made better decisions. And probably someone more rational than me would probably say that. But I think for me, with everything, with the business, it was less around like, yes, there were lessons that I picked up about business models and kind of understanding particular things, but actually there were so many more lessons that I learned about myself that I wouldn't have picked up as much if we had stopped a year or 18 months into it. Like for whatever reason, I had to go through 3 years of the whole 3 year kind of pain process to take the lessons that I really needed to get out of it to help prepare me for the next thing. And so like, I'm just a big believer in, you know, everything kind of happens for a reason and things will happen in their own time. But when you know, you should act. And if you don't, then that's on you.
Yes. Oh, I believe that, man. I love that. So how many months is left in your 12-month experiment?
Another good question. I think it's probably another 9 months or so. We'll probably do it for, I'd say 12 months starting now. Like we're in COVID.
Yeah, that's right. A bit of leeway. Any, have you learned any lessons so far? Like apart from some of the stuff we've been discussing, just from this experience of breaking those patterns, any other like big lessons, or are you still just exploring it?
In terms of?
I guess like from, you know, breaking these patterns of, especially around like money, like your relationship status, all these kinds of things, having this sort of polar opposite experience for these 3 months so far, like, have you taken anything from that, or are you still just kind of in the process of exploring?
Yeah, so like, I mean, there's still so much that I need to work on. So I won't say that like I have all of the answers or anything. One thing that I am consciously spending a little bit more time on is just working on myself a lot more, in a way that you like, that I hadn't been able to previously for various reasons, like not just being in a relationship, but also like having a business and just, you know, being on all of the time. We recently went through a sort of internal mindfulness session for 2 days this week, and there were a couple of things that really struck out to me. One was like, I have always found it very difficult to identify my own personal values, or articulate them in a particular way, in a way that wasn't really generic, but were actually really true to me. And there's a really good exercise that I think I haven't spoken to you about this, but there's a really good exercise that I think would be really beneficial for your listeners to know about as well. And so the process is, pick 3 to 4 people that you really admire or look up to, and then write down the qualities that you really admire in those people. So what are kind of the characteristics, or what are the things that they do that you really sort of look up to? Then scratch out those names and group them together and, create a list of sort of 4 to 5 things. Most people get to sort of 3 to 4. If you've got 5, that's great. And voila, those are your personal qualities or things that you sort of really sort of look up to or aspire to be. And I think the really interesting kind of part of that is it's less around, I want to be really driven or kind of all of those sort of things. It's more the people that you have really looked up to for a length of time. What is it about them that beyond just their kind of particular achievements, what is it about their personality or their characteristics or their story that really help you connect to them? And it's interesting how easy sometimes it is to group a lot of those things that you thought these are actually 3 or 4 very different people from very different walks of life, but actually there are very common themes that keep resonating and essentially like helping you identify like what are those things that are really important and critical to you. It's the first time that I've been able to really articulate those things being really important to me in the right way.
How do you feel that helps you now being able to articulate them clearly? So one thing that I've tried to get, like this has happened a few days ago, but one of the things that I have tried to do is make sure that at least once a day I'm looking back at those qualities. And I think a lot of it is just like happiness in general is, I think, being aligned to the things that you really value. Yes.
And so if you are more conscious about what are the things that you value, you can be more deliberate with the way that you make decisions, perform particular actions, or do things that help you get on that particular path. And so part of it for me is just is understanding that because these things are really important for me, am I doing things today that are helping align me to these values? Or am I not? Or are there particular things that aren't doing that?
Yeah. And
I think it's just kind of a daily kind of tracker of kind of doing those things, but also just kind of realizing that these are qualities that you want. Like I'm wondering whether part of it is just like, are these also qualities that you want in a partner? Or qualities that like, I've realized that, some of the stuff, a lot of my really close friends, there are a lot of friends that demonstrate these things, demonstrate these qualities. And I did this test with one of my friends from high school who, like, we're super, super close, but we're also very different in terms of kind of outlooks and views. His list was very similar to mine, actually. And so, like, again, I'm just I only found out about this a few days ago, but I'm just wondering, like, how that resonates with the people around you in your life and, like, the relationships that you already have in place and potentially the relationships, like, the type of friends, family, partners, or things like that you want.
That's cool, man. It's awesome exercise, and I couldn't agree more. I did a similar thing last year, which was sort of creating... The values were like one part of it, but it was like a whole document of like my ideal life, which included like values and then also like relationship, friendships, location, income, like everything. Sort of just like to the best of my knowledge. And this thing, it's like an ever-evolving document. It's not like set in concrete because your values can change or things change or your perspectives change, but like just gives you some sort of compass of like, this is what I said I want. And exactly what you said, man, it provides this like, it's almost like a decision-making framework of, I've said I want these things. Like these are the things I've said are important to me, these values, and I am doing this today. Are they helping me get closer to them and display those values, or is it actually displaying the complete opposite?
Yeah.
And it's like very black and white of like yes or no. And so it just makes things really, really obvious and decisions really, really easy. Yeah.
So at work, we have 14 leadership principles that are meant to be characteristics or representative of everyone inside the entire global organization. And the way that we hire, the last part of that process is to do a loop interview where you do 5 one-hour interviews with 5 different people. And they're testing you not on your experience or skill set, because getting to that stage means that you've already been sort of assessed on those abilities. It is purely on, do you match the cultural values of the organization? And so each person's given 2 of those leadership principles to test you on, and you have to collect data points, and you have to back up whether you do feel or don't feel that person matches that criteria based on the data points that you've sort of collected. But like, I think, similarly, you mentioned this a little bit earlier in relationships. I think it's really easy to get drawn into like, oh, this person's really nice, or we seem to just have all of these like really generic things in common. She loves Liverpool Football Club as well. Like, amazing, like my favorite person in the world. And like that's important to a degree, but it's not the values. It's not kind of things that like you can kind of take away. And again, like I think having seen that, it sounds weird to like when you say like a decision-making framework for a relationship or for a partner, but like actually it's true. Like if you don't have a framework or like a decision-making process to understand like what are the things that are really important to you in life, and how do you assess whether the people are like match those things that are important to you or not, it's obviously very easy to get swayed by more generic surface level things that actually aren't that important for you and that potentially diminish or go away after a particular length in time. So yeah, as weird and like scientific and whatever as it sounds, like I can't say that I've set it up at the moment. You did send me the document.
I did.
Yeah. And I remember reading it and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like I want to copy paste this for myself. But for the people that are listening, I don't know if you've spoken about this on your podcast before, but I guess, if someone was to, and I'm asking this because like, I kind of want to do this exercise myself,
sure.
But for someone who is wanting to do something like that, like what does that process look like in putting that down on paper? Are there particular questions that you ask for yourself, or like, how do you begin to write that down?
Yeah, I love the question, man. I think so for me, and I guess it sort of depends on the person, but the way I did it was I got a list of, there's a few questions. I forget the specific ones, but it was things like, when do I feel the most happy? Like, what does my ideal day look like? Stuff like that. So it's kind of like making you reflect on, well, what are the things that you really want or that you really value? And I did an Instagram post, so people can probably go back and find that to see the exact questions. But and then in terms of actually doing it and getting it out, I dedicated an entire day. So blocked out an entire day on a calendar, and I got up and I meditated for an hour, and then I didn't turn my phone on for the whole day. I just took a piece of paper or a notebook and a pen and went to just a random cafe that I've never been to before. So it's like a new environment, so it's not like routine at all. Just literally sat in this cafe I was there for 3.5 hours just writing. And it was literally just like I had these prompts, but just whatever comes to my mind, just write. I ended up writing like 20 pages in like a journal. And so I had that sort of brain dump, which is based on those questions and prompts. Then I went home, phone's still off. Like I haven't spoken to anyone that day. It's just like fully me. And then just go on the computer, and then I just had this like 20 pages, and then just basically turn them into like a coherent kind of document. And so overall it was about like probably 8 or 9 hours work. But the way I saw it was like 8 hours invested for the next 80 years of life.
Yeah. And it's like, like it's a very personal thing, and like thank you for sharing that with me as well.
Yeah, of course.
It was actually incredible reading that, because I think for the first time I saw a very clear articulation of like the type of life that someone wanted, but then also the key characteristics and things like that. So again, like that whole example of seeing that in someone else, like helped me go like, what does that look like for me? And again, like I think it's just so easy to be aimless with that sort of stuff, or just whatever, which is fine, but it's not. You're just more likely to repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah,
that have happened before.
That's it, man. And it's like, when you just have like things so clearly defined for yourself, it filters in the wrong people, filters in the right people, but also filters out the wrong people, you know, which is equally as important, if not more. And like, I've done this, man. I've literally like on like dates and stuff, I've like sent this document to like the people I've gone out with, because they're like, oh, what are you all about or whatever. And then I'll just send them the document. It's almost like, like they can kind of check and see if they kind of, their values align in a way.
That's amazing.
And it's like, why not? Like, again, it sounds, people might listen to that and be like, oh, it's so like analytical and like takes romance out or whatever. But it's like, yeah, you don't want to just like rely on a piece of paper or a document or whatever. But, you know, if I send something and there's something like blatantly against their values in it, like, why not just find out early, like then and there? Why waste time and mess about and go down this road when it's not going to lead anywhere? It's just like, you know, it's almost like a screening document for like people and things.
Yeah. And like, you know, again, like I think a lot of it is just intention based. So like, I think if someone finds that really weird and doesn't like you as a result of that, that's a filter on its own, because the fact that you've gone through the process to identify that means that you look at relationships in a particular way. And if that doesn't align with someone else, then you're much better off knowing that now than you are kind of down the line. So like, I think that's amazing. Yeah. And that's really cool.
Thanks, man. And it's like exactly what you said. If someone finds the idea of like defining your ideal life and then using that as a compass to help filter in opportunities and people, if someone finds that repulsive, that idea, exactly what you said, that's a filter on itself. That shows me that they are not like deliberate people. They're probably like pretty wishy-washy and like over infatuated with this idea of like spontaneity or romance or whatever. And like, I'm not saying I don't like value that or I don't have that, but you know, it just shows that their mindset is different. It's not better or worse. It's just different, and we're probably not going to get along.
Yeah. I mean, like, we're probably not the two best people to be like talking about what, how women will perceive things as two dudes. But, like, I think it's just, again, it's like that, those input behaviors, right? Like, I think it's, if you're more deliberate around all of these sort of things and you are doing the things that, help you align to someone, even if it just means that like people that aren't aligned just recognize that themselves and kind of pull out or those sort of things, like you're just much more likely to find the things that do align a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is, you know,
and it's crazy, dude. It's like, yeah, it's weird, dude. Like, I actually consider my life very simple, and in a way it's complicated, but not really. I actually think my life is so simple. I've set up things nicely for myself, and again, like, nothing's permanent, so like anything can happen, but like, at least right now, I just have so much clarity on, that's the thing. It's not like about like it being easy or being necessarily like simple. It's just like, I just have so much clarity on what I need to do. And it's like, again, I've just kind of removed all this ambiguity and all this fluff and all these other people's inputs, like society, media, government, whatever. They're like injecting all this crap. And I've just like, but I've been like, all right, I'm not going to like let that, I'm just going to define for myself what I want, you know? And so because that's the thing, when you have like external inputs and they're kind of defining your life, that's creating so much internal friction, because the true you like wants to do something, and then the external voices and things are like making you do something else. And then there's like all this tension. And if you can just like remove that tension and just be aligned and then have clarity on what you need to do, then your life becomes simple and you will be happy and you will just execute and do what you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% believe in that. Like, I think clarity just means that you're able to take action and just do things so much quicker and so much more effectively. Like, a very specific example of this is, I mentioned a little bit earlier around me being kind of stuck in this gray area of like, not knowing if I wanted to buy, not knowing if I wanted to move, like all of those sort of things. When I decided that I was like, actually, you know what? I was going to do this 12-month thing and then figure it out. I decided on the Wednesday after a Wednesday dinner that we had that I was going to move. So I looked at a few places, shortlisted a few places on Thursday, Friday, went and looked at a couple of shortlist places. This place was the very first place that I walked into, put in an application and then signed the lease on Monday. And there was a period of maybe 2 or 3 months before that where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to move. Like, I don't know, all of these sort of things. And, I don't think that everyone needs to move that quickly. Like I called my dad and I was like, hey, is it weird that it's taken me like 4 days to find 4 or 5 days to like find something? Like, should it take longer? And he's like, it doesn't matter whether it takes you, 3 hours or like 3 months or whatever. Like, if it's the right thing, it's the right thing. Which I think is also true. But I think when you have clarity on things, it just means that you can move a lot quicker, on things. And like, it's just a much better place to be than just in your head and not knowing one way or the other. Right. And like, it's so easy to get stuck in a job that you're unhappy with, in a relationship that you're unhappy with, and like all of those sort of things when you're stuck in that gray of like, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. But you secretly do know.
That's it, man. Yeah. That's the thing, deep down. That's the thing. I always believe that, man. It's like, we know the right answers and like deep down, but we're just not willing to listen to like what's already inside. I believe that so much because it just gets like, and this is one thing, like, and this is another fucking tangent, but like doing Vipassana meditation is one thing I learned, is that there's so much like stuff just beneath the surface that we kind of push down or we don't let surface because we don't want to face it. And that's like, if you do that and you're willing to look at that and listen to what's already in there, then that gives you all the clarity you need. And like you said, it just gives you speed of execution. And that's like, that can be such a defining factor on whether you get what you want or not. Speed, like that's often underestimated, I feel like. So,
well, I think the value of speed is like not just the speed itself, but if it's the wrong thing, you'll just know a lot quicker because you've made the decision sooner. And so where I think like people go like, is this the right thing or the wrong thing? Actually, most decisions are things that are very reversible. They're not irreversible decisions. And being stuck in this middle zone of like, I don't know if this is the right thing or not. So like, I've got this, I keep coming back to this, but like this rental for 12 months. If 6 months in, I'm like, actually, you know what? I really want to move overseas or I really want to do whatever. I totally can.
Yep.
Like that is not something that's kind of set in stone. But I think it's just very easy to get sort of stuck in your head and be stuck in this kind of unhappy place because you're kind of very conflicted, where oftentimes like if you just pick one, it doesn't need to be the right thing. But at least if you make a decision, you'll know pretty quickly if it's the right thing or not.
Yeah. Love that, man. So good. So fucking good. Well, that's awesome, man. Let's we've been going for almost 2 hours now, so
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So why don't we wrap up here? Been a good combo so far. A few rapid fire questions. You read a good book lately? One that stood out to you?
I am obsessed with a guy named David Goggins. I don't know if you've come across him before. I have listened to a lot of his podcasts and things like that previously. I have had his audiobook Can't Hurt Me for a while, but I just started listening to that earlier this week. And it's incredible. It's really, really good. It's he's a very extreme version of sorry, I know this is meant to be rapid fire questions, but
no, as long as you want.
I think he's a very extreme version of like things that I really believe in. In terms of like I think he puts things in terms of like callousing the mind and like all of those sort of things, but I think it's just so important to do things that are uncomfortable and so important to like put yourself in situations that are difficult that most people run away from, because I think that's where you really learn and develop and grow. And also you develop a lot of confidence in yourself. Right? Like if you know that you can get through difficult moments, post stage label, when I'd essentially kind of lost all of my money, and you kind of learn that like, not having any money sucks, but that you can deal with it. And if you've gone through it once, you can go through it again. removes the whole kind of process of like, oh my God, what happens if I take this risk again and like the business doesn't work out, right? And I think that confidence is just a flywheel effect. It just means that you make better decisions around things. It makes you more confident. And as a result, you're just much more likely to find the thing that actually makes you happy and successful.
Love it, man.
So long story short, check out the book if you haven't already.
Cool, man. It's a good one. And what's coming up next for you over the next month, year? Any big plans for podcast or just in general?
Yeah, big plans. So, I mean, podcast is in just such a good place at the moment. So I mentioned that I don't really look at my numbers, and I was a little bit worried that no one really listened to it coming back. I think it's been about 3 months now. So it's back into kind of full steam of things, but it's interesting having taken that time away and being more deliberate and better with the podcast. It's just done the best month. Last 2 months have been the best 2 months ever for the show, which I wouldn't have kind of expected. So definitely planning to continue on with that. I have a couple of different projects in the works as well, which I think I've mentioned one of them to you. I don't know if I'm ready to kind of talk about that just yet, but hopefully I'll be able to share it once kind of things come into place a little bit more. Sure. And there is the other thing that I'm kind of really spending time on at the moment is on angel investments. So just helping, just kind of finding really interesting companies and just helping support them with a little bit of cash, with just connections, with introductions to more capital and those sort of things as well. So
cool, man.
Yeah.
Exciting. And anything I haven't asked you, or just anything you want to pass on to the audience before we finish up?
Anything kind of pass on? Not particularly. Like I think we've covered quite a broad section of things. You know, I think the main thing that the main bit of advice that I would give to anyone listening to this podcast is that everyone's got an opinion on things, and you will hear a range of different bits of advice from people on different podcasts or different walks of life or your friends and family. And you just have to understand that like everything is contextual, and like the stuff that we spoke about is advice or experiences from our own lens, but that may or may not be right for you. And similarly, when you get advice from family or friends or other people, like it is from their own view of the world.
Yes.
And so the best people that I have found are like the most successful people have been the ones that have been willing to listen and understand the context and take what's valuable, but then chuck away the rest. Just because someone tells you to do something in a particular way or does something in a particular way doesn't mean that you need to. So just be willing to back yourself and understand what is the right thing for you, regardless of what everyone else is doing. Love it, man. It's great advice. Last question is just, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to say hello or check out anything you're up to? Best ways to connect with me via socials on Instagram. Like it's all different. So on Instagram, it's Rohit_Bhargava. On Twitter, it's Rohit Bhargava 7. I don't know if I should share my TikTok, but you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Like I'm pretty. It's pretty easy to find me, I think, on social media, and you can also email me, rohit@startupplaybook.co. If you have anything, again, like I'm always up for just meeting interesting people and things like that. And if there's anything that I can sort of help with or whatever, just say hello. Love it, man. And yeah, you definitely are, because that was how we first connected in the first place. I just reached out to you and you were willing to meet me for coffee. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your friendship and appreciate you coming on the show today. So thanks again. My pleasure, mate. You have an awesome podcast, and I'm very excited to watch your journey to 100 and for the next 10 years. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.